Some songs were everywhere for exactly one season, on the radio, on MTV, at every party, and then gone like they were never there. Unless you lived through it, you probably have no idea what any of them are. Here are You Don't Remember, these 10 one-hit wonders, unless you're Gen X. Number 10, She Drives Me Crazy by Fine Young Cannibals, 1989. Fine Young Cannibals were a Birmingham, England band that formed in 1984 from the remains of the ska and new wave group The Beat. The lineup consisted of vocalist Roland Gift, guitarist Andy Cox, and bassist David Steele, Cox and Steele being the former Beat members around whom the band was assembled. Gift had a background in theater and brought a theatrical intensity to his vocal delivery that was genuinely distinctive. His falsetto was high, strained, and urgent in a way that divided listeners almost immediately. People either found it arresting or irritating, with very little middle ground. She Drives Me Crazy was released in January 1989 and reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States, staying there for 1 week. It also reached number 5 in the United Kingdom. The song was built on a tightly coiled funk pop groove, minimalist, almost nervous in its energy, and Gift's vocal sat at the very top of its register throughout, creating a tension that the production never released. The music video, which received heavy MTV rotation, featured stark black and white photography and close-up shots of Gift's face that emphasized the song's sense of barely contained urgency. The album it came from, The Raw and the Cooked, was released in January 1989 and became a substantial commercial success, reaching number 1 on the Billboard 200 in the United States and number 1 in the United Kingdom. The follow-up single from the album, Good Thing, also reached number 1 on the Hot 100, making Fine Young Cannibals one of the very few acts in history to have their first 2 American chart toppers come from the same album. By any standard, they were not a one-hit wonder in the traditional sense, but they effectively disappeared from the mainstream afterward, releasing nothing further as a group until their dissolution in the early 1990s. Gift pursued an acting career and appeared in several films. Cox and Steele largely retreated from the music industry. The reunion attempts that followed over the subsequent decades never produced new material. For most people who did not live through the specific months when She Drives Me Crazy was inescapable, the song and the band exist in an equally unfamiliar space, which places them squarely in the territory of artists that only the generation who lived them tends to know well. Number 9, Fade to Grey by Visage, 1980. Visage were a British synth-pop and new wave act assembled by singer Steve Strange, born Stephen John Harrington in Wales, around the fashionable Blitz Club scene in London that formed the beating heart of the new romantic movement in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The Blitz Club, held weekly at a Covent Garden wine bar, was the gathering place for a specific generation of young British people who were interested in fashion, image, and the possibilities of synthesizer-based music simultaneously. David Bowie was said to have visited the club and recruited Steve Strange and Rusty Egan, Visage's drummer, as door staff for the video for Ashes to Ashes in 1980. Visage were never a conventional band in the performing sense. The musicians involved included members of Ultravox and Magazine, contributing on a session basis rather than as committed members. Rusty Egan handled drum programming and was a central figure at the Blitz Club as its resident DJ Midge Ure of Ultravox served as co-producer and contributed significantly to the arrangements. Billy Currie, also of Ultravox, played keyboards. The project had a fluid, collaborative structure that reflected the art school environment it came from. It was about an aesthetic as much as it was about a band. Fade to Grey was released in 1980 and became a significant hit across Europe, reaching number 8 in the United Kingdom and topping charts in several European countries, including France and Germany. In the United States, it received substantial college radio airplay and MTV rotation, finding the audience paying attention to what was arriving from Britain without necessarily appearing on mainstream commercial radio. The song's structure, alternating verses in English and French, built over a cold, pulsing synthesizer arrangement with sparse percussion, gave it a European sophistication that felt genuinely different from American rock radio. The French verses were sung by a vocalist named Brigitte Arens, and the interplay between her measured delivery and Strange's more theatrical approach gave the track an unusual dramatic quality. Strange struggled with drug dependency and financial difficulties through the subsequent decades, and his career never stabilized into anything resembling lasting commercial success. He died in February 2015 at the age of 55. Midge Ure went on to co-write Do They Know It's Christmas in 1984 and co-produce Live Aid in 1985, securing his place in a considerably more widely remembered piece of music history. Fade to Grey remains the primary document of Visage's brief moment, belonging to the generation who found it through import records, college radio, and early MTV before it had fully crossed the Atlantic. Number 8, I Melt With You by Modern English, 1982. I'll stop the world and melt with you. Modern English were a Colchester, England post-punk band who formed in 1979 and had released 2 albums of dark, angular post-punk before I Melt With You completely rewrote the commercial understanding of what they were. Their earlier material, Mesh and Lace, in 1981, and the initial recording sessions that would become After the Snow in 1982, operated in the tradition of the British post-punk bands who were more interested in atmosphere and tension than in conventional melody. I Melt With You was the song that departed from that template. It was recorded for the album After the Snow and released as a single in 1982, where it reached number 78 on the Billboard Hot 100 on its initial release. Respectable for a British indie band, but not a mainstream breakthrough. Making love to you was never second best. Its real commercial life came later, when the song was included on the soundtrack of the 1983 film Valley Girl, a low-budget California coming-of-age film that found an audience beyond its initial expectations and introduced the song to a much wider American audience. From that placement, I Melt With You became one of the most consistently recognizable songs of the early 1980s on American radio, used in countless film soundtracks, television commercials, and period compilations in the decades that followed. It charted again on reissue in 1983, reaching number 78 a second time, but its cultural footprint vastly exceeded any chart position it ever achieved. There's nothing you and I won't do. The band continued to release music through the mid-1980s without repeating that commercial crossover, and they eventually dissolved in 1991. A reconstituted version of the band has performed and recorded sporadically since the early 2000s. For Gen X listeners, I Melt With You is one of those songs that feels like it has always existed, a permanent fixture of the decade's emotional landscape, attached to memories of specific summers and specific people in ways that have nothing to do with the chart positions or the film that launched it. The band that made it is known to most of the people who love the song as the band that made that song and essentially nothing else, which is both a limitation and a kind of permanence.
I'll stop the world and melt with you.
Number 7. Turning Japanese by the Vapors, 1980. The Vapors were a British new wave band from Guildford, Surrey, who formed in 1978 and came to prominence quickly through an association with the Jam. Paul Weller's manager took them on after the two bands crossed paths, which provided a useful entry point into the British music industry. They signed to United Artists Records and released their debut album, New Clear Days, in 1980, alongside the single that defined their entire career. Turning Japanese was released in February 1980 and reached number 3 in the United Kingdom, spending several weeks in the top 5. In the United States, it reached number 36 on the Billboard Hot 100, which was a modest chart position that substantially underrepresented how widely the song was heard on American radio and MTV through the early 1980s. The song's driving new wave rhythm and its central hook, simple, infectious, the kind of melody that requires minimal exposure to establish itself permanently, gave it a radio life considerably longer than its chart run suggested. The title and its meaning attracted widespread speculation from the moment of its release, with various interpretations circulating that the band has consistently disputed.
I got your picture, I'd like a million of you over myself.
Lead vocalist David Fenton has said in interviews that the song was written about obsession, the experience of becoming so absorbed in something or someone that it transforms the way you perceive the world, and that the Japanese references were thematic rather than specific. Whether listeners accepted that explanation or preferred their own reading, the song's ambiguity became part of its cultural identity. The Vapors released a second album, Magnets, in 1981, which received minimal commercial attention, and the band dissolved later that year. Fenton went on to work in public relations, eventually becoming a well-regarded media consultant in the United Kingdom. He has occasionally spoken about the band and the song in interviews when journalists have found him, which happens with some regularity given that Turning Japanese has never entirely left the background of popular culture. It appears in film and television productions set in the early 1980s, and it appears on compilation albums aimed at the generation who heard it first. The Vapors, as a band, are otherwise almost entirely forgotten. Number 6, Safety Dance by Men Without Hats, 1982.
We can dance, everything's out of control.
Men Without Hats were a Montreal band built around brothers Ivan and Stefan Dorashuk. Ivan was the creative center, songwriter, vocalist, and the figure whose particular vision shaped the band's identity. Their sound was synth pop with an enthusiastic, slightly absurdist quality that owed something to the European electronic music that had been filtering into North American college radio through the early 1980s. Safety Dance was released in 1982 and reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States and number 6 in the United Kingdom. The song's production was bright and driving, built around a synthesizer hook that was immediately accessible, and Ivan Dorashuk's vocal had a playful authority that sold the song's unusual content without blinking. The music video, set in a medieval English village, featuring a dwarf, a jester, and Ivan leading villagers through an elaborate outdoor dance, was one of the more memorable videos of MTV's early years. It was strange enough to be unforgettable and cheerful enough to be endearing rather than unsettling.
We can act like we come from out of this world, leave the real one far behind.
The video was directed by Tim Pope, who also directed numerous Cure videos during the same period. The song's subject, commonly interpreted as a defense of the right to dance in public spaces, possibly inspired by bouncers ejecting people from clubs for pogo dancing during post-punk performances, was delivered with enough confident obliqueness that most listeners accepted it without requiring a clearer explanation. Men Without Hats released follow-up albums through the mid-1980s without finding another comparable commercial moment in the United States. Pop Goes the World in 1987 reached number 20 on the Billboard Hot 100, demonstrating the band could reach the mainstream again. But nothing they made occupied the cultural space that Safety Dance had claimed. Ivan Doroschuk has remained the most consistent presence under the Men Without Hats name across subsequent decades. For a generation of people who were teenagers in 1983, the song is embedded at a level that transcends any specific metric. Number 5, Come On Eileen by Dexys Midnight Runners, 1982. Dexys Midnight Runners were a Birmingham band led by Kevin Rowland, whose musical and aesthetic vision was in a state of constant deliberate reinvention. The band that recorded Come On Eileen bore almost no resemblance to the band that had released their debut album, Searching for the Young Soul Rebels, in 1980, which had drawn on a sharp, brassy soul sound rooted in Van Morrison and the Memphis soul tradition. By the time Come On Eileen was recorded, the band had been reconstructed around a Celtic folk pop hybrid featuring fiddles, accordion, and acoustic guitar, alongside the remnants of their earlier brass section. Rowland was a demanding and difficult figure to work with. Band members came and went with a frequency that made continuous personnel unusual. His convictions about the music and the band's direction were strongly held and non-negotiable, which produced music of genuine originality and a working environment that most musicians found unsustainable. Come On Eileen was released in June 1982 and reached number 1 in the United Kingdom, spending 9 weeks at the top and becoming the best-selling single of 1982. In the United States, it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and was the best-selling single of the entire year, 1983. The song's momentum, built on fiddles, a driving acoustic rhythm, and Rowland's passionate vocal, crossed every demographic boundary that the record industry usually relied on to predict what would and would not reach the mainstream. The follow-up album, Don't Stand Me Down, released in 1985, was an elaborate, idiosyncratic record that deliberately departed from everything that had made Come On Eileen accessible. It sold almost nothing. The band dissolved in 1986. Rowland's solo career produced one additional chart moment, a 1999 cover of Jackie that reached number 13 in the United Kingdom, before he returned to the Dexys name and released One Day I'm Going to Soar in 2012, which received genuine critical appreciation. For the American audience that had made Come On Eileen the best-selling single of 1983, none of this subsequent history registered. They had one song by a band whose name they had mostly forgotten, and that was the whole story. Number 4, Steal My Sunshine by Len, 1999. Were a Toronto duo consisting of siblings Mark and Sharon Costanzo, who operated under the names Mark Costanzo and Sharon Lady Shaw Costanzo. Their debut album, You Can't Stop the Bum Rush, was released in 1999 and contained Steal My Sunshine, a track built around a sample from the 1979 Andrea True Connection song, More, 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 and a laid-back, summery production that recalled the sunshine pop and loungecore aesthetic that had been developing in certain corners of independent music through the late 1990s. Steal My Sunshine reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States in the summer of 1999, number 8 in the United Kingdom, and number 1 in Canada. The Andrea True Connection sample that anchors its production, the brass figure from More, 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 was cleared for use and gave the track an immediate warmth that worked in its favor on radio. giving first-time listeners the sensation of having heard it before. Sharon Costanzo's deadpan spoken word delivery in the verses and Mark's more melodic chorus sections gave the track an unusual two-person dynamic. It arrived at the precise right cultural moment. The summer of 1999 was the last summer before Y2K anxiety peaked, before the dot-com bubble began to wobble, and before September 2001 changed the cultural atmosphere entirely. The song's breezy energy fit that specific moment in a way that was difficult to replicate afterward. Len released no further significant material. Sharon retired from music. Mark continued working in production on a smaller scale. For Gen X listeners in their late 20s and early 30s that summer, it is one of those songs attached to a specific temperature and feeling of those months, rather than to any broader musical context. It belongs almost entirely to the people who were exactly the right age at exactly the right time. 3. How Bizarre by OMC, 1996.
How bizarre. How bizarre.
OMC was a New Zealand musical project built around singer Polly Fuimana, who had grown up in South Auckland and developed a musical sensibility that drew on hip-hop, R&B, and the West Coast American sound of the early 1990s. How Bizarre was produced by Alan Jansen and recorded with a budget that reflected the project's independent origins, small, resourceful, and entirely unlike the mainstream pop production of its era. The song was released in New Zealand in 1995 and became a domestic hit before being picked up for international release in 1996. It reached number 1 in Australia and New Zealand and crossed into the United States and United Kingdom in 1996 and 1997, reaching number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 5 in the United Kingdom. The song's casual, conversational delivery, Fuimana sounding more like someone recounting a strange afternoon than performing a pop song, and its production, which combined a mariachi-flavored guitar sample with hip-hop rhythms, created something genuinely difficult to categorize. Radio found a place for it anyway.
Destination unknown as we're pulling for some gas.
Fuimana struggled with serious health problems through the years following the song's success. He had been diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease that progressively limited his physical capacity, and the demands of an international music career compounded those difficulties significantly. He died in January 2010 at the age of 40. He was working on new material at the time of his death, though none of it was released. How Bizarre has the quality of a song from another dimension. It sounds like nothing else from 1996. It sounds like nothing else from anywhere else. And the man who made it is gone before most of the people who remember the song ever thought to learn anything about him. Fuimana received a posthumous New Zealand Music Award in 2010. For Gen X listeners, the song is a specific and slightly mysterious memory, something on the radio that summer that nobody could quite place geographically or stylistically, that appeared and then receded into the background of the decade, leaving only the melody and a sense of unresolved curiosity behind.
How bizarre. How bizarre.
Number 2, Mambo Number 5 by Lou Bega, 1999.
3, 4, 5, everybody in the car, so come on, let's ride.
Lou Bega was born David Lou Bega in Munich, Germany in 1975 to a Ugandan father and Sicilian mother. He had been developing his performing style through the mid-1990s, drawing on the mambo tradition of Cuban bandleader Perez Prado, whose original Mambo Number 5 had been a Latin music landmark in 1949. Bega's version took Prado's framework, updated the production to contemporary dance pop, and added a new set of lyrics built around a list of women's names. A hook simple enough to be immediately memorable and specific enough to inspire debate about who the names referred to. Mambo Number 5, A Little Bit Of, was released in Germany in 1998 and reached international markets in 1999, when it became a global phenomenon. It reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States, number 1 in the United Kingdom, and number 1 in Germany, France, Australia, and numerous other markets simultaneously. In the United States, it spent 17 weeks in the top 10, which is a remarkable run for a track that most listeners received as a novelty.
In my life, a little bit of Erica by my side.
The song was inescapable through the summer and autumn of 1999. Bega released follow-up material without replicating the song's commercial success. His subsequent albums were received with mild interest in Germany and largely ignored in the English-speaking markets that had briefly made Mambo No. 5 inescapable. He has continued to perform on the international nostalgia and entertainment circuit, where the song gives him a reliable live moment that translates across languages and generations. The song occupies a specific position in the memory of anyone who was in their 20s in 1999. It was ubiquitous, slightly absurd, impossible to avoid, and attached to a specific quality of that specific summer in ways that are difficult to articulate but immediately recognized by anyone who was there. It was the last summer of a decade, and Mambo No. 5 was playing at every party that marked it. The version of Lou Bega who made that record has remained frozen at that moment in the public memory, unchanged from the summer that introduced him.
A little bit of you makes me your man.
Number 1, Mbop by Hanson, 1997. Hanson were 3 brothers from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Isaac, Taylor, and Zach, who had been performing together since the early 1990s, starting with a cappella performances at local festivals and fairs before developing into a full band. Isaac played guitar, Taylor played keyboards, and Zach played drums. They had been performing and recording independently for several years, including a self-released album, before catching the attention of major label A&R following a performance showcase. Mbop was released in April 1997 as the lead single from the major label debut album Middle of Nowhere, produced by Dust Brothers, the production team whose work with Beck and the Beastie Boys had helped define the sonic texture of mid-1990s alternative pop. The song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States and stayed there for 3 weeks. It also reached number 1 in the United Kingdom, Australia, and a significant number of additional markets. The album it preceded went on to sell over 10 million copies worldwide. The song was built around a hook, the mbop syllables, that was simultaneously catchy and deliberately nonsensical, giving it a quality that divided adults and connected immediately with younger listeners. Taylor Hanson was 14 years old when the recording was released. Isaac was 17. Zach was 11. The fact that they had written the song themselves, not as a manufactured product of adult songwriters writing for child performers, but as actual young musicians working out their own material, was something that the music press was slower to acknowledge than it might have been. Hanson continued to record and perform after Mbop and have maintained an active career through the following decades that most people who were introduced to them in 1997 are entirely unaware of. They formed their own independent record label, 3CG Records, and have released multiple albums without major label support. Their fan base, known as the Fandom, has remained remarkably loyal and sustained the band's touring and recording activity through years when mainstream attention had moved entirely elsewhere. For Gen X listeners and their slightly younger counterparts, Mbop is a song that arrived from a specific cultural moment, the summer of 1997, a particular peak of 1990s optimism, and has never fully left. The 3 brothers who made it were children at the time. They are now adults with their own children, continuing to make music that the people who loved mbop in 1997 largely have no knowledge of. That distance between the song's permanent presence in memory and the band's actual ongoing existence is one of the more poignant gaps in Gen X musical nostalgia. Some of these songs are still playing in the background somewhere, in a store, in a film, in the back of your memory attached to a summer you had forgotten. That is what this generation's music does. If any of these brought something back, hit the like button and subscribe. There is always more where this came from.